Something interesting happened this week, constitutionally for Australia, and that is that Prime Minister Albanese, while he was in the UK, had a meeting with King Charles, and when he was asked about his previous support for a referendum on the issue of making Australia a republic in the future, he said that it was not a priority of his and that it wouldn't be something that would be pursued while he was Prime Minister. For those of you that aren't aware, maybe aren't Australian or aren't too familiar with what the actual relationship is between the country and the king, Australia is a constitutional monarchy, which in practice means that the monarchy is entirely ceremonial, but is regarded as somewhat of a controversial issue due to the fact that the monarch of Australia is by default the monarch of the United Kingdom, representing an existing legal tie to our colonial heartland, if you want to call it that. And the idea of abolishing the monarchy is something that has come up a few times throughout Australian history, most notably in the late 90s when there was a referendum on the issue which was soundly defeated when it was put to the Australian public. Now, that particular referendum, there is some discussion as to whether or not the model of republic proposed was maybe not that popular and possibly even put forward by John Howard to ensure that it would fail. But regardless, the issue of an Australian republic was put to bed for a decade or two after that referendum. What changed, though, when the Labor Party came back into power in 2022 is that they seemed committed to reinvestigating the issue and promised the creation of a minister for a republic if they were elected. They were, that minister was then appointed, and it seemed that Australia, or at least the Labor government, was going to pursue the idea of a Republican referendum to officially abolish the monarchy in Australia and replace it with some sort of president that would most likely be elected by the people. But realistically, any hope of a Republican referendum, at least in this term, was completely blown away when the Voice referendum failed. That has left some scars on the Labor Party, and I don't think they're in any hurry to really put forward another, what would mostly be interpreted as a meaningless, ceremonial, rubber stamp sort of referendum on a social issue that people can very fairly say isn't that relevant to most Australians. So with Labor, or more specifically Albanese himself, saying that so long as he is Prime Minister, that he's not going to pursue the Republican issue while he's in office, well, I think honestly, and I say this as somebody who was the leader of my university's Australians for a Republic movement, who organised on this, who went to meetings about it, who went to a multitude of different gatherings of Republican-minded people in Australia, I think it's probably for the best. Because as I've gotten older, I've got a little bit more practical in how I view potential political changes in Australia. And when I think about the Republican movement and the attempt to abolish the monarchy here, it seems like such an enormous mountain to climb that is so perilous, so unlikely to succeed, that at the end of the day, I can't deny the fact that the day-to-day lives of Australians realistically would not change. Robert Menzies described passing referendums in Australia as one of the labours of Hercules. It is a profoundly difficult task, getting not only a majority of the Australian public, the voter base as a whole, to agree on passing an amendment to the Constitution, but also getting 4 of the 6 states to also sign off on it is beyond difficult. This is why a vast majority of referendums in this country fail. Let me just put it into context. 45 referendums have been put to the Australian people to change the Constitution. Of those 45, only 8 have passed. And of those 8, 7 of them had broad bipartisan support. So unless you have both political parties agreeing that something in the Constitution desperately needs to be changed, then realistically, you are not getting that referendum off the ground. And we learned that the hard way with The Voice just 2 years ago. The last time that Australia passed a referendum was in 1977, nearly 50 years ago. On top of that, every single referendum put to the Australian people since 1984 has been rejected not only by the broader population, but by every single state in the country. I do not want to give credit to John Howard, but I think he put it best when he said in, I think, a fairly recent interview that Australians are an inherently skeptical people, particularly when it comes to promises of change or promises of improvements. We are very used to the idea of a promise being made to us and us being, I cannot buy that from this guy. It's just sort of a cultural norm here. And that's kind of proven in referendums. I mean, 8 out of 45 times we have agreed to actually change our founding document. And I think part of that is because, realistically, if you look at referendums, there is a fair argument to be made that making that change, let's be honest, things are not that bad that we need to shake up our founding document. But that's just one side of it. And I think there's something much more important when it comes to issues that the Republican movement is going to face when it comes to trying to abolish the monarchy in this country. And that is that it is very hard to get everyone to agree on one constitutional framework for a hypothetical presidential system in this country. Look, this was actually a major reason that the 1999 referendum on a republic actually failed in this country. Because the question that was proposed was the idea of replacing the role of the Governor-General and the monarch with a president that would be selected by 2/3 of Parliament. Essentially that any president in this country would be somebody appointed directly by Parliament and kind of implicitly subservient to them. And that was a problem for a lot of Republicans because they much more preferred the idea of the direct election of a head of state. But here's the painful bit. At least for me personally, I think the parliamentary appointment model is a much better idea. Here's my personal problem. I love Westminster democracy. As a base political system, I think it is one of the best. A broad parliament, accountable to the people, and then leadership comes from that as like sort of a collective effort to find leadership. The idea that a hypothetical president here would be directly elected by the people alone, that is dangerous because I think presidents under that hypothetical system where they're just elected by a broad popular vote would be under the impression that they have the right to act politically, which I think would directly undermine the very idea of Westminster democracy. This is one of the things that I hate about presidential systems, this idea that one individual, completely independent from the legislature, is given a set amount of time to essentially do whatever they want independent of the legislature. That to me is insanity. It's probably one of the main things that I hate about the American political system, is that the president has an unbelievable amount of power invested in him. He has a direct election. Electoral college is a nightmare, but you know what I mean. And he has 4 years to essentially act completely independently from the legislature. The idea of that here is profoundly concerning to me, at least. American presidents are incredibly difficult to remove from office. And as a consequence of that, they do have this implicit encouragement to kind of do whatever they want, regardless of what relationship they have with the legislature, which just drives me mental. If there has to be a president, it should be somebody that Parliament agrees is not going to infringe on their rights, because Parliament is in this country the embodiment of democracy. And part of the reason that I think prime ministers are such a better head of government than a president is that, well, a prime minister is bound by what is actually happening. It's not 4 years and then, or in our case, 3 years, do whatever you want. It's 3 years, stay in good standing, and if you step out of line, there is a way to very easily be removed from power if your party decides that, well, you just aren't the guy anymore. If there ever is a president of this country, he or she needs to be somebody that is approved by Parliament and somebody that understands that them winning an election, becoming president, whatever the process is, that they become president with the understanding that they are not there with a mandate to actually use the reserve powers that are currently afforded to the monarch and the governor general. Because if a president got elected through whatever means and decided that they were just going to start using the powers of the governor general as they exist today in the Constitution, with a strict, like, literal interpretation of the Australian Constitution, that is a relatively unchecked dictator. And no politician in that country should be that powerful. My God. Sorry, that was really just a rant about how I feel about the Republic, a potential Australian Republic. Thank you for sticking through this very long-winded rant. I have just settled into my new place relatively. The tree is still here. Photos will be going up. I don't know if this will always be the angle that I'm filming from, but yeah, that is my first video here, and I'm very interested to hear your guys' thoughts. I'll probably do some polls in the coming days as to what you think about a republic. This wasn't really my typical analysis of what is happening. This was more just me settling in and wanting to rant about a broad topic, the Australian Republic. So please let me know what you guys think down in the comments below, because the Australian Republic is a very divisive issue, I can understand, but I would be thrilled to see what some of your perspectives are on it. So I'm looking forward to reading that, and I'll see you guys next time.